Howdy, my name is Madeline Slater, and today we're going to be talking about my curriculum development, inquiry-based reflection. Let's get started. To briefly cover our table of contents today, we're going to have 10 total sections that we will cover, starting with our introduction to curriculum development. So this is where we will set the stage and identify the purpose of the curriculum that I chose to develop. We will do a quick overview of the lesson plans that I have chosen to include. And this will cover the lesson content, the format, and curriculum topic. Next, we will talk about curriculum commonplaces, which are the teacher, learner, subject matter, and MALU. Then we will cover curriculum orientations, which will be my personal orientation as well as the fit with mandated orientation. Then we'll discuss some tensions and balance between curriculum implementing and curriculum making. Then we will get to our connections to research through the article reviews that we had the chance to research over this semester. Continuing on to section 7, we have our content selection. So I will get to discuss the TEKS and objectives that were selected for the lesson plans and talk about why I chose them. Then the scope and sequence for curriculum development. This is the what, why, and how. Then articulation across subject areas. So these are our content connections. And then finally, we will wrap up with our conclusion for today. So to go ahead and get started and introduce inquiry-based reflection, this type of curriculum places an emphasis on the takeaways of a lesson topic in order to kind of seal student understanding before moving forward and building on those previously learned concepts. So the reason why I wanted to develop this curriculum is because I personally feel that classroom teachers these days tend to breeze over the closure part of a lesson cycle. Sometimes it has to do with the time that they have, which we will actually talk about later. But when they breeze over this and they skip it, it does not establish that students are truly understanding what they were supposed to learn. And of course, teachers can check for understanding through a variety of ways, typically informal or formal assessments. But a lot tend to keep the door closed on student reflection after each lesson. And so I believe that by activating student inquiry and engaging the class in higher order thinking questions while reflecting on the lesson topic, this will ideally help them secure their understanding at the end of each lesson, thus preparing them for future learning. So that's kind of the purpose and the reason why I chose to develop inquiry-based reflection. And so let's move on to the overview of lesson plans that I chose to show this curriculum. And so we will cover content, format, and the curriculum topic. So I picked to do 5 days of lesson plans, so one whole school week. And I actually covered these lesson plans. I picked them from student teaching this past spring. And so I tweaked them a little bit to really, I guess, display the curriculum I'm trying to develop here. By adding a little bit more within the closure sections, which actually tells you something already, that they were already not very well filled out in the reflection area from previous lesson plans in the spring. And so by developing this curriculum, I was actually able to expand on that with real examples of lesson plans that were actually used. And so the topic of these plans are plant and animal needs and behaviors. They are for a second grade science class, and I chose to do I do, we do, you do, or I guess our school had already chosen that format and we just kind of went with it because we believe that by modeling and guided practice and allowing the students to take responsibility for their own learning, that is an effective way to engage students throughout a lesson cycle. And so, of course, after the independent part of that lesson cycle, students then come all together to have whole group reflection or even peer or turn and talk with your partner reflection on the lesson concepts. And so next we're going to talk about curriculum commonplaces. So these are the teacher, learner, subject matter, and MALU. So talking about myself as the teacher, I would like to think that I am a medium control teacher, yet I do emphasize the importance of student-centered learning. And so actually after taking our class this semester on learning theories, I liked to kind of call myself the more knowledgeable other in the classroom. And so I stay in control of classroom management, but I also understand the importance of and I implement student-led activities, as this gives students the opportunity to advocate for their own learning. And talking about the more knowledgeable other, when we talk about learners, many of the learners in my classroom are very high achieving, and they come from middle to high socioeconomic statuses. However, there are a lot of ELLs and students with their own IEPs who do require differentiated instruction in meeting their academic or learning needs. And so, as I was talking about the more knowledgeable other, many of my high achieving students tend to act as another, quote, more knowledgeable other for those students who need the extra support. And I think that's such an awesome thing to pass down to those students so that way they can see me being the more knowledgeable other in the room to all of the students as a whole, and then those higher achieving students can act as that same more knowledgeable other that we're calling it to those other students who need the support. And so then moving on to subject matter, I wanted to cover both the lesson plan subject matter and the curriculum development subject matter, just briefly here. But the curriculum, inquiry-based reflection, refers to our higher order or higher level thinking questions about what was learned in the lesson so that students can apply and connect the learned material to the real world. And so honestly, this can be used universally across all content areas, which we'll actually discuss in a later section. And so the plans themselves, however, are based around a second grade science classroom. So plant and animal needs is a science topic, but inquiry-based reflection can be used in any subject for any lesson. And then lastly, for the MALU, at the school where I got these lesson plans from, because I'm just pulling this from my student teaching experience, they have a very high reputation for student success. So the expectations for students are a little bit higher than most other schools and districts, but our teacher administration support is readily available to everyone. And so their main reputation is rooted on the idea of outputting frequent student success. And so I did want to add that, I did want to add that it is my hope that one day I can return back to this school district with this reputation. But should I not return to this district, it is my hope that I can still implement this curriculum wherever I may teach, as it fits with my learners and the mandated curriculum utilized by the district that I end up working for. Okay, and so that wraps up our commonplaces. And so next we're going to talk about curriculum orientations. So my personal curriculum orientation actually spans across two of them. So the main one that I feel resonates with inquiry-based reflection is development of cognitive processes. And so this focuses more on metacognition and reflection, which goes hand in hand with reflection, or inquiry-based reflection, rather, because that's what it is. I mean, reflection is reflection. And it gives students the opportunity to think about their thinking, which is metacognition, when they are reflecting on what is learned in the lesson. And then also I wanted to choose personal relevance as well, because even though they are reflecting on what they're learning, they're also applying that knowledge to things in the real world. And while they are learning the concepts, they are also learning how to reflect, which is a skill that they are going to need in the real world. So as personal relevance talks about skills that are relevant in the real world, students are learning how to use higher order questioning skills and reflection that they can bring with them anywhere in the career, in their careers in the future. And so the first two that you see on the screen there are my personal orientation. And then on the bottom, we have the school district's mainly adopted orientation, if you will, which is academic rationalism. And so what they believe is that what is taught is the knowledge that people need to know. And so the major function of this school is to foster the intellectual growth of the students in each of the subject matters most worthy of study. And so I feel that this fits with my personal orientations, development of cognitive processes, and personal relevance, in the way that students still have the opportunity to learn what is important and relevant to their lives outside of school through their experiences in the classroom. Personally, I feel like these orientations kind of go hand in hand, and so I feel like they fit fairly well with each other. Okay, but of course, where you have good fits, sometimes there's some tension, which will cause a teacher to need to balance these things. And so we're going to discuss tensions and balance here between curriculum implementing and curriculum making. So as I was thinking about this curriculum development, the main tension that came to mind that I actually mentioned a little bit earlier is mandated time for the subject matter during a class schedule. And so what I mean by that is that oftentimes school districts or even campuses themselves will often carve out a specific amount of time that should be dedicated to each subject lesson during a school day. So for example, an hour and a half for math, 45 minutes for science, an hour and a half for ELA, or 30 minutes for social studies, etc. Okay, it differs everywhere depending on what they want to emphasize and what they want to spend more time on. And so the fear of not having enough time to really look back and reflect on each lesson before moving on to the next subject for the day may cause educators to eliminate the reflection phase of a lesson cycle altogether. And this is why I wanted to develop this curriculum, because it puts that emphasis on reflection and it makes it a priority when you are teaching different lessons or different subjects throughout the day. And so what teachers do with their time inside the classroom is what really matters. So even though, yes, you may be required to, take the kids to lunch by 12:15, what you do until 12:15 is up to you. And so I really believe that it should be encouraged for teachers to adjust their lessons, so that way the time that they spent on each subject or each part of the lesson gives the students enough time to reflect at the end, because this should be a priority in the lessons, so that way they get to learn these reflection skills and truly grasp what they are learning before they move on to something that builds off of that. And so with that, an educator needs to be able to balance, well, let's say an effective educator needs to be able to balance between curriculum implementing and curriculum making. And so basically what this means is that a teacher must follow what is required of them, thus partaking as a curriculum implementer to an extent where that teacher may also have the opportunity to express some flexibility and adopt or make their own curriculum that still fits within the mandated curriculum or their orientation. And so I believe that my curriculum of inquiry-based reflection can be easily balanced among the mandated curriculum because, like we just talked about, the goals of my personal orientations, that was development of cognitive processes and personal relevance. I believe that the goals of those align very similarly to academic rationalism, or the goal of academic rationalism, rather. So they should easily fit together there with orientations, and then with the tension of time or working within the mandated time limits, that can be adjusted by the teacher depending on how much time he or she allots to each section of a lesson cycle. Okay, so meaning the teacher can be flexible with their time on the time that they spend motivating the kids at the beginning of the lesson, modeling for the kids, going into guided practice with them, and then the independent practice. They can be flexible with how much time they spend on those things in the lesson in order to provide enough time to spend on reflection so that it all fits within the mandated amount of time. So like in the illustration I gave earlier, or just brief example, you have to take the kids to lunch by 12:15. If you have time to motivate the kids for the lesson, model, go through guided practice and independent practice before 12:15, you can figure out how to adjust it so that it fits, so you can take the kids to lunch at 12:15. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's move on to our article reviews. So these are our connections to research. Okay, so over the course of this semester, we had the opportunity to conduct 2 article reviews. And so both of my articles that I chose connect in some way to inquiry-based reflection, mostly because they made connections to inquiry-based learning, which is the stem of inquiry-based reflection. And that's honestly the main connection between both of these. In the first one, The authors supported computational thinking, which is displayed through modeling, simulation practices, problem-solving practices, and systems thinking practices. And so with all of that, they supported inquiry-based learning environments, which again is the main idea behind inquiry-based reflection. You're still asking those higher level questions and expecting higher level answers, or critical thinking within that process, which the authors of that first article there really support. And similarly with the second article, even in the title there, you see critical issues of mobile inquiry-based learning. They honestly just mostly resonated with the ideas of inquiry-based learning and mobile inquiry-based learning, which was IBL with a tablet or some sort of mobile device. And so those were just tools that inquiry-based reflection can stem on as well, or stem from, should I say. Okay, so we're quickly going to just breeze over content selection, which are the TEKS and objectives. I'm not going to read all of these word for word, but basically these are the second grade science TEKS that talk about organisms and environments, and the basic needs and behaviors of plants and animals. So feel free to pause the video if you want to read through all of this, but if not, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the objectives. And again, these are just the objectives that build off of each other. So the first one on the left is that students will be able to identify the basic needs of animals. Then in the middle, we move on to the behavior of animals, migration and hibernation. And then lastly, we have plant and animal behavior, which includes dormancy at the end. Oh, actually, I did want to say that I chose these lesson plans with these TEKS and objectives because even though, they are required by the state to be taught, I personally feel that the topic of plant and animal needs and behaviors is a perfect segue for students to be able to reflect and apply what is learned in the classroom to the real world because we see plants and animals every day around us. Okay, so that would give students an awesome opportunity to be able to connect that directly to the outside world or outside of the classroom. Okay, now we can move on to scope and sequence. And of course, this is the what, why, and how behind the curriculum development. And so I've said it many times, but for the scope, this is what the curriculum development is. And so again, I have chosen inquiry-based reflection curriculum. And again, the purpose behind this is to emphasize the closure phase of a lesson because I just feel like it's very easily skipped over in modern curriculum implementation. And so it is my goal to change this for the sake of student content retainment and real world skill building, as the ability to reflect through that higher order questioning is a skill that is widely used in many careers daily. And so it's so important for students to learn these skills starting at a young age. And then the sequence, again, through the lesson plans that I chose 1 week's worth of second grade science lessons. However, my intent is to hypothetically demonstrate a curriculum that could be used across all subject areas daily. And so the lesson format was I do, we do, you do. And I also added on the slide reflection because that is such an important phase of the lesson cycle at the end of every lesson. And, again, within the I do, we do, you do, the teacher is modeling, guiding, and encouraging students to explore on their own. And all of that opens the door to effective reflection afterwards. And so speaking on the internal logic of myself as a teacher, this curriculum fits with my internal logic because of my personal preferences of lesson format. Teachers who want to provide an emphasis on inquiry-based learning, maybe through their guided practice, may not need such a heavy emphasis on reflection. But if you're a teacher like myself who wishes to place that emphasis on reflection, this is the curriculum for you. And I just feel like this curriculum fits with the logic of the students because it helps them see the lesson concepts come together in the end, connect the concepts to previously learned concepts, and see how the concepts can be applied to future learning or real-world examples. And so, again, this can be used universally. And that segues into our articulation across subject areas. So these are our content connections. So as I've said many times, curriculum, or my curriculum development, inquiry-based reflection, can be incorporated across all subject areas: science, math, social studies, ELA. But on this slide, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into ways that it can be used in each. And just kind of as a disclaimer, everything that is written underneath each of these subject areas can honestly be applied anywhere with other subjects. Like, for example, reflection on exploration in science. Exploration can be used in math. It can be used in ELA or social studies. It can be used anywhere. However, I kind of put items on here that might be more heavily emphasized within a certain subject rather than another subject. But again, all of these can be applied ubiquitously. So starting with science, like I said, you will have plenty of opportunities for reflection on exploration and those higher thinking and questioning skills. Inquiry learning environments are typically very widely used in science classes. And then moving on to math, the application to future careers. Those mathematical concepts can go very far in life, especially if you have a STEM career, but even, non-STEM careers will use math, I'm sure, at some point. And then in social studies, the reflection on social skills and application to real-world experiences. Social skills are skills that students need today. They need them now, out in the real world. So teaching them to reflect on those skills in social studies is something that they could use immediately. And then with ELA, the reflection on reading skills, thinking about maybe the characters that they're reading about, what are the characters feeling, making those text to self connections, metacognition, thinking about their thinking. Okay, all of those skills can be used in an ELA classroom as well. And so finally, for our conclusion, I know we're coming up at about 30 minutes here, but we talked about inquiry-based reflection and its constituents. So we labeled what it is. And then I included my personal annotations, my personal thoughts, and comments on why it should be implemented. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you can implement this curriculum into your classroom someday. Thanks so much.